Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Apologies for being a little late. I got yakking, lost track of time. But tonight, episode 137, we're going to be talking trail tires. And you may be asking yourself, well, how is that bushcraft relatable? Trust me, it's bushcraft relatable. If you do any driving on back roads and stuff like that, there is some things you may want to pay attention to, or some things that you didn't know about tires that we're going to talk about here tonight. Just keep in the back of your mind, even if you don't do a bunch of back roads driving and stuff like that, it's just good information to have when you're buying any kind of tire. Some of the things we're going to talk about. And what brought this whole thing up, funny enough, Ben and I were looking at tires. We're both our vehicles are going to need tires in the, soon to future. And we were trying to figure out what the best bang for the buck is going to be for the kind of lifestyle we live. We want to be able to drive around because we have jobs, we have day lives, and we want to be able to, bang around in the woods too.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's exactly it. You've hit all the points. I think the show's done. Record for AVA, 1 minute show. Done.
That'll go down in history. But the thing is, when we were going on about it, there's a lot of little nuances and niches and stuff like that I'm sure some people are completely aware of, but we weren't completely aware of them going in.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there was a bunch of stuff we got talking about, and as we started going through it, we said, this kind of needs to stop. We need to get into this. This is probably a great conversation for the podcast. And so we had a ton of subjects that we just kept bouncing back and forth in even our brief conversations, right?
No, 100%. And honestly, if you're good for it, Ben,
yeah,
I kind of feel like the chronological order for this is basically the same way we went about it when we were chatting, because that kind of made sense and one thing led to another and all was good. And we basically started off with tire size. Something nice and easy. Tire size. You know what I mean? Like, what size tire can you put on your vehicle? And I guess from my point of view, what I knew going in was that you can, if you look in the door frame, if you still got the sticker there, generally it's going to tell you what the size tire belongs in your vehicle, or it's going to tell you in your owner's manual, or you can look it up online or something like that. Yeah. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the only tire that goes on your vehicle. And this is kind of where you and I started our discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think both of us are actually planning on going up a tire size. And by that we mean a greater overall diameter of the tire. Now, there's a few reasons for that. One is it does get us additional clearance.
And that's kind of the big gain that we're looking for.
Yeah. It is, for sure. A little bit more clearance, a little bit more ability to sort of go over bigger things. There's a few downsides to that, though. The bigger the tire, the less true torque your vehicle is getting to the ground. So you actually have a little bit, if your vehicle has to work a little bit harder to turn that tire. Now, is that going to be a problem? Probably not. If you're not doubling the size of your tire, you're only going up 10% or less.
Yeah. And funny enough, when we were talking about that and I was looking it up, the manufacturer itself, I think they say you're good for between 5 to 7%.
Yeah.
Variance in your tires, because different tire manufacturers, they have a little bit of variance in them as well. And I guess let's back up and talk about right to the basics. If you look in the sidewall of your tire, and being the side that faces you, you're going to see three numbers generally. You're going to see like a 1, or in my case, I'd see a 265, a slash, a 65, slash 17. So your first number is your tire width, how wide your tire actually is. Second number is your aspect ratio, how far it is from the rim to the outside of the tire, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it, Ben?
Yep.
And then your last number is basically your wheel size, 17 being a 17-inch rim. So when we're going up tire size, or in my case, like I said, I take a 265, 65, 17. That's stock. I'm going to go to a 265, 70, 17, which is just increasing the aspect ratio because I can't actually go wider, which was out of the gate wasn't something I thought I was going to be concerned about, but apparently if I go any wider, when you go on to a full turn, you could potentially start scraping the wheel wells and things like that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. In fact, there's a ton of places. If you look up your specific make, model, and year of vehicle, I guarantee you there is somebody out there that has already tried this and will tell you exactly how big of a tire will fit in your wheel well without rubbing, without lifting your vehicle. And they'll tell you if you do this much lift, this is what you're going to gain. I know it's true for my vehicle. I got the Subaru Forester. That's what I've been playing with lately. And there is a ton of information on that. But when I had the Silverado, the Colorado, the Jeep Grand Cherokee, and other vehicles I've had, I've looked it up. There's usually a following. Every vehicle tends to have it, of people who've done things to these vehicles, and you can get a lot of information for that. You mentioned going wider, and there's a few advantages of going wider, but there's also a lot of advantages of going narrower.
Mm-hmm.
In winter, in snow and ice, a narrower tire is actually going to actually do a lot better for you. The bigger tire tends to lift up, tends to hydroplane a bit more. Smaller tire, think of it as like a knife blade. It's actually going to cut through that stuff and go down. And you really have to figure out your terrain. Like, bigger tire, yeah, that's great. Smaller tire, like I said earlier, you're going to get more torque, but narrow tire, you're going to dig in. In the summer, you might want that wide tire. If you got nice dry pavement, that's going to give you that ability to turn and curve and drive up over sand and mud a little bit better. So you really have to think about what the tire is going to do for you. For a lot of my vehicles over the years, I've actually ran a narrower winter tire than I do a summer tire.
Simply so you get that little additional traction in slush and snow.
I've been told that dropping like 10 numbers is almost a similar improvement as a winter tire. Now, it's not 100% as good, don't get me wrong. But if you do that and a winter tire, the improvement in winter driving is markedly increased.
I can believe that. Just before I forget, I want to give a shout out to Fish85, saying hello from Northern Michigan. Loves the show. First time catching you guys live. Good to have you on the show, man. So if you have anything you want to say, just throw it in the comments. We do look at them live. If you have something you want to add to it, by all means, please join us.
Northern Michigan, he might actually have better winters than we do.
I was about to say, it's actually not. It's a pretty good place down there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, and I guess we're going to keep our talks on tires somewhat robust, rounded about. There is a bunch of other things you can get into when you're talking tires too, as Ben kind of alluded to there. You can start talking about lifting your vehicle so you can put bigger tires on. You can get wheel spacers to allow for wider tires. Like, there's a lot more to it than what we're going to talk about, but I mean, it's kind of its whole own thing. Now, what Ben and I are looking at is trying to keep our stock setups. We don't want to get into lifting. We don't want to get into modifying suspension or changing axles and any of that craziness. We just stock. What's the best tire we can put on to get us a little extra clearance? Or at least that's what I'm looking for in my Ranger. I just want a little bit of extra clearance. And Ben, much the same there, but we use these in our day-to-day lives, so we don't want to lift them, because once you start lifting things, you change the gyroscopics off it, blah, 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 blah. It works great when it's off-road, sometimes not so great when it's on the highway. Once again, whole other thing. Feel free to look that up, because we're still just diving into it a little bit ourselves, but we have come to the conclusion we're not looking to modify the chassis in any way.
I mean, I spoke to a guy, he has a Jeep that he had done up for off-roading, and I mean, it's an awesome Jeep, don't get me wrong, but he basically told me it's almost undrivable on pavement.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem you run into when you start doing these extreme modifications.
And one of the things he had mentioned that I had never thought about before, and I won't mention his name in case he doesn't want me to, or that's something he wants to do, but he is the more you modify a vehicle, the more things you change away from stock, the more likely your insurance company is to turn around and say, I'm not covering that. Like, there is a risk factor there. So if you do a lot of modification to your vehicle, you may affect that. And like you said, these aren't vehicles that we own solely for going into the woods. We'd love to have that, but this isn't the world we live in. So, my majority of my driving, unfortunately, I think I said, is probably 80-20 best case scenario, pavement versus is dirt roads and fun. Now, some months that's being very generous on the off-roading. And other months, if I get the opportunity, it may be much closer to 50-50. And I love those months, but they don't happen as often as I'd like them to. And the ironic thing is I had the big tires on the Subaru for like 9 months, and I took them off, and like a month later I went to Newfoundland with my road tires and did a whole bunch of off-roading stuff. So,
and don't get us wrong, this is not to say you have to change your tires to go off and have fun in the woods. This is just one of the things we're looking at doing. If maybe if you are in the market for a new set of tires and, you know, you got your old vehicle, new vehicle situation, or maybe it's your primary vehicle and you're much like us, you just want to have the ability to go to it. These were things that we were thinking of, so we thought we'd share what our findings were. So I guess we covered like what the numbers on a tire mean, and we talked about getting a little extra lift by increasing the aspect ratio and a little extra width if you change the overall tire width. And we're using millimeters here because, you know, that's most common for our neck of the woods. That's why you get the 165, 65-17 or whatever. But there's like when you get, there's other measurements too. You can get like a 31-12-17, something like that, which is it much the same thing, just a different way. It's like metric versus standard, but it's not really metric versus standard. I don't actually quite know what the difference is between the two. I know you can convert them. There's calculators online. Just go in, convert them, and you're good to go. Whatever one makes the most sense to you.
Speaking of calculators online, if you are changing your tire size, there's some really good ones on your tire conversion websites that you can put in your two tire sizes.
Say hi, and then off to bed.
And a bear.
All right, bud. Off to bed.
We'll watch it on TV.
So those tire comparison apps really will show you what the difference of this tire versus that tire. It'll actually tell you how it'll change the speedometer, and it can give you a few predictions. And yes, the numbers we have are. I always find it funny because it is a metric width, and then it's a ratio, and then the rim size is still in imperial. So. It's all over the place, and it's no wonder some people find it hard to understand. Those are the numbers, but there's also letters, the P and the LT, and then we got load ratings.
And these were the things that we started learning about and how they relate to stuff. Like, I think it's safe to say we both understood passenger light truck, just at face value. One's for passenger vehicles, one's for light truck vehicles. Yeah. What's the real difference in those, Ben?
For me, and I really discovered this the first time I had a truck, because I had a truck with P-rated tires on it, and then I went to get them changed, in the dealership who had sold me a truck with P-rated tires told me you should have LTs, and I said why, and they tried to explain to me, and they said basically it's a stiffer sidewall, it's a tougher tire. A lot of people use the ply rating. We have a bit of information on that later, but it's essentially it's a tire that can hold more load. It's a more heavy loaded tire, which means you're going to have a rougher ride compared to a P-rated tire. So if you're just driving around town and you're never doing anything, never loading the vehicle up, a P-rated tire might actually be a more comfortable, better tire.
Generally cheaper as well because, you know, less material. Yeah. Mom wants you back again? Go with Mom. I know.
Okay, go to bed.
And a P-rated tire, if not stressed, may actually give you better mileage and last longer. But if you're going to be putting heavy loads on it, a P-rated tire is not going to survive nearly as long as an LT. So a tire needs to be matched for the driving you're going to be doing and for the treatment you're going to put on it. So there's, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, to add to that, something that our listeners, viewers may keep in mind is, even if you're not necessarily putting the extra weight on the tires, which is why they do design them tougher, if you're going to be doing a lot of driving in like shaly areas, where you have more, or rocky area in general, where you have a little bit more chance of getting a puncture or debeating a tire or something like that, white truck may also be a little better thought for you simply because it is a tougher tire. A little harder to pop off the bead, a little harder to puncture it, a little harder to chip the rubber in it. However, once again, generally makes a rougher ride. Also with a white truck tire, to a degree, especially if you get into like all terrains and stuff like that, which we'll talk about again later, they have the ability, or at least a rating for if you lower the pressure to get some additional traction, which once again we'll talk about in a few minutes.
And that's something that I also want to get into on my vehicle. So there's a whole section in that. But before we get too further away, let's talk about rim size a little bit. So I've actually looking at going down a rim size. So instead of 17s, which my vehicle came with, I want to go to 16s. And some people look at me like, why would you do that? I know people who are actually trying to get bigger and bigger rims. But my issue with that is the bigger the rim, and my outside tire diameter isn't getting any smaller. It means I have less and less rubber between my rim and my tire. Now, in an off-roading situation, or even like speed bumps, because I had my last vehicle, for anyone who knew, was a Dodge Dart. Now, there's a reason for that. Don't hate me. But I hated that vehicle for one reason and one particular reason only, and it was that the rims basically had rubber bands on it for tires, and every time spring rolled around, I bent a rim. Like, I could not help it. No matter how good I drove, no matter how much I avoided things, I was finding that here in Nova Scotia with our poor roads, I was consistently bending rims, and I was getting frustrated with it. Like, I went through 2 sets of steel rims on that vehicle, and I was not pleased with it. And I had my aluminum rims were slightly oval. Didn't seem to affect the driving too much, but it's because it didn't have any depth. In my winter tires, actually, I had higher sidewalls. But, so if you're doing off-roading and if you're going, like, lowering your tire pressure and doing any of these things, you need that rubber to be, because that is part of your suspension on this, right?
Oh, yes, no, for sure.
But your tires absorb so much more, so this is how you can protect your rims, your overall vehicle, by having these sidewalls. So I'm going down a rim size. I believe you're sticking with the same rim size?
Yeah, because I have the option to go to 18s. That's the other stock rim size that comes in my truck, and much the same. I debated going to 18s. We had this conversation. Same kind of deal. And even though you're going down a rim size, if you increase the aspect ratio, you can generally make up that rim size. But it is a balancing act between you can't go too much, because if your sidewall gets too tall and you're dropping pressures and stuff like that, then you start increasing the risk of potentially popping the side out or getting the fleshy part out to where it can get banged up a little bit. But I mean, you're talking some pretty extreme cases there.
Yeah. I mean, there's some huge sidewall tires out there, and if you look at any dump truck, you can see that. The other problem with smaller rims is you'll actually notice it at the fuel pump.
Yeah.
Rubber weighs more than aluminum, essentially. So the lighter your spinning wheels are, the less momentum it takes to get them up and to control them. So people want, for best fuel mileage, the lightest tire and rim combination you can come up with. Ironically, when you're going to off-roading, we're actually going to, and there is an advantage even in off-roading, we're going to go against that because I want more rubber, I want less metal, so I'm going to shrink that down. So now I know I'm going to pay for it. And I've seen it. Like, even with the experiments I've done, I see that there is a difference in my mileage. But for the protection to my vehicle, I'm more than happy to pay a few extra cents for 100 kilometers.
And I mean, honestly, with the price of gas right now, you're talking maybe an extra cent a liter at the fuel up, something like that. I mean, unless you're going extreme measures again, but we're not talking that. So Fish 85, downfall of the Subaru platform is that the McPherson strut setup and the limit of height on the tires. An offset rim helps along with a spacer, but then you're talking about wheel bearings. Yeah. So obviously Fish knows a little bit about this stuff too. So by all means, man, any information you can send our way, start throwing it up in the comments.
The other thing I've heard, now that he's thrown that out, is if I raise the suspension on my vehicle, it's really hard on the CV.
And then change the angle.
Yeah. So really, you are limited. But
you have an Impreza or Forester?
Who, me?
Yeah,
Forester.
You got a Forester. Okay. So it's the Impreza. I know one of the big modifications that people do with the Imprezas is put Forester shocks on them because you gain height right off the bat just by doing that. However, that's the flip side of it is you start changing the axles on start changing the angle on your CVs and stuff, and you can potentially get into some problems there depending on how hard you're riding it. So, so Fish 85 has an 05 Impreza. I'm sure he knows exactly what I'm talking about. Sorry, I know I derailed you a little bit there, but yeah, so we talked a little bit about passenger LTs, things like that. So keeping with the broad spectrum, if you want to look for, you can potentially put a light truck tire on a car. Once again, you just got to find the correct tire size, because, I mean, most of the tires you put on cars, the same size on trucks, they just change the actual structure of the tire. That's where you get the LT passenger, as we already talked about. So if you do have, like, I don't know, trying to think of something that might work out here, but all the ones I'm grabbing from my head are old cars, and I don't want to start dating myself. I was going to say, if you got a Chevette, because that used to be the classic, beat around the woods, you could find an LT tire for that. But more realistically, if you have a Kia, I'll just take something I got that we used to own, a Kia Rondo or something like that. You can find an LT tire that'll slap on that vehicle, and it'll give you stiffer tires for if you want to go banging around in the off-roads. But as Ben said, it's going to be a rougher ride in the pavement, probably cost you a little bit more money, going to be noisier. Generally, LT tires cause a lot more road noise. All things you got to weigh into it if you're going to be looking at putting LT tires on a passenger vehicle. On the flip side of that, same as you could put passenger tires on a truck. As Ben mentioned, it's going to be quieter, probably get a little better fuel mileage, but you better not go doing too much woods road banging around, or chances are you're going to blow those tires all to hell.
Yeah, and if you start loading, 1,000 pounds in the pan and hook a trailer onto it, you're going to regret this. You're going to start having potentially issues. Not guaranteed, but.
So we talked about the differences there. Now we did mention load ratings, and we might as well go right into that because you mentioned trailers. So if you are going to be putting weight on and you are going to be towing trailers and stuff like that, regardless if it's a car, truck, SUV, doesn't matter, load rating starts becoming more and more and more important. And there is different standards when it comes to load rating. Once upon a time, back in Ben and I's day, because we talked about this, it used to be ply. Everything was ply. So truck tires used to start at 4 ply and run to 10 ply. Passenger tires ran from 2 ply to 6 ply or something like that. But now it's not so much ply as load rating, as we've been using here, because that's the more modern term if you're into that young hip stuff. So how does that correlate, Ben? Why don't you guide us in a little bit, and I'll interject, because you actually know a little bit better about this than I do, because I'm playing catch up, unfortunately.
Well, the original ply rating meant there was a cotton layer and then rubber, and cotton layer and rubber. So 10 ply was 10 plies of cotton. Newer tires are used more stronger materials. Some might be like a Kevlar or something along those lines, maybe a fiberglass. If Lone Wolf was here, he'd know a hell of a lot better. He used to build tires. But that's how it is. So the newer materials are stronger, and so you don't need as many plies, but people still use the same rating. And tires may still say 10 ply. The reality is if you were to cut into it, you won't find 10 plies. But it'll be the equivalent of what a 10 ply would have been 30 years ago, 40 years ago, back when we were young.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like I said, I didn't even know that ply was an outdated term until yesterday, basically, as we were chatting, and I started doing more research on it.
Yeah, and the reason that came by is we were looking at 2 or 3 tires. We were trying to compare them. We were trying to figure out which ones we liked the best. And we were trying to really, because we love to debate things, and we throw ideas off each other. And I had found, 2, 3 tires I liked. You had a couple tires you were kind of looking at, and we were tossing back and forth. Well, what about this one? And one of the things you said is, I think, and we do know it was an error, and I'm not making fun of you here by any means, but you said, I think that's a 2-ply tire. And in fact, somewhere else we've seen it was a 10-ply tire. And I said, I think plies are out of date anyway. So we looked it up, and sure enough, it is. There is a different rating. So it's load rating is your better number to look for. And so with load rating, you kind of can even look it up and see what that load rating means. Usually, eventually, it'll work out to a capacity, how many pounds that tire can carry. So then you look at what's your gross vehicle weight rating, and you divide that by 4. As long as your tire is better than that, then you should be solid. Never hurts to have a couple extra pounds one way or the other. You know what I mean? But if you have a small vehicle, you don't need a 10-ply tire.
No.
Like if you're running a smart car, Smart 4.2 or whatever they called it, running an LT tire might be a bit of overkill. Like you're never going to put 10,000 pounds in that vehicle.
And nor is it heavy enough to crush those tires down where you need the extra ply. That's, you know what I mean? All things you got to consider into that. And when we're talking load ratings on that, they measure them in both letters and numbers. The number is the newer standard. Letters they're slowly getting away from. But you still see them around quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, so load ranges are, say, B, C, D, E, and F under LTs. Ply ratings were... and they correspond, like a B is a 4, a C is a 6, a D is an 8, E is a 10, and F is a 12. And then there's the max tire pressure you can put in. So a B-rated tire, yeah, you have the same chart I'm looking at, is 35 PSI, C is 50, D is 65, E is 80, and F is 95. So your average passenger vehicle out there is running about 35, 34, 32 PSI, right?
Yep.
You don't need huge rated tires for that. And then off-roading, a lot of guys are running much lower pressures to gain that traction. So if anyone doesn't know, if you're out on the beach, and this has saved people's lives, but if you're running on say, sand or beach, and your vehicle bogs down, you go out and drop 10 pounds out of your tires, you might just drive out of it.
And there's been instances, not necessarily on the beach, but people have been stuck in deserts and stuff like that. And I think you were the one telling me the story. They got stuck. They started walking. They dehydrated. I think they expired. The people came to retrieve their vehicles. Literally all they did was drop air out of the tires, and the vehicle drove out of the hole they were stuck in.
Yeah. And that was the story I heard was a couple in Australia. It was on TV. They were talking about, I think, the way it was it was a couple. They had drove back. They bought this little all-wheel drive vehicle, drove back to this dry lake where there was a tower, some water and stuff in it. They were back there just camping, and when they tried to get out in the morning, they couldn't. They were stuck. He decided to walk. She stayed, or vice versa. One of them survived, one of them didn't. And the funny thing was, I think it was the girl that ended up surviving. And when the recovery crew came, they literally drove the vehicle out of there without having to hook a single winch on it to do anything. And all they had to do was drop those PSI. So dropping a few PSI can make a huge difference in traction and getting you around. So in that case, you're not looking for a higher pressure tire. But if you have an F-rated tire and you have a light vehicle, you drop all your tire pressure, you're still probably not gaining that much traction.
It's too hard.
Your vehicle is just never going to have enough straight, like flat, right?
No, 100%. So yeah, just things to keep in mind, especially when it comes to weight ratings, load ratings, things like that. The numerical values, you can look all this stuff up on. That's all I did. Literally Googled load ratings, and it'll give you both the letter and the tires, the letters and the numbers. So things to keep in mind. Because as Ben said, if you put them on a smart car, the car's probably not heavy enough to drop down and actually gain you any traction out of that. Because you actually have to squish those tires. What you're doing is flattening it out ever so slightly, so that the lugs and stuff can dig in a little bit better into some of those slipperier or stickier or... yeah, slipperier.
Your surface area is increasing. So you're spreading all that out, and it's trying to drag more rubber through the ground, so it's easier to actually move it. So the irony in it, if you don't believe us, go out to your bicycle, drop a few pounds out of your bicycle tire, and start paddling around a neighborhood. You're going to notice you work a lot harder to ride. It's not going to roll as well, but you'll almost never be able to spin that. Like even on the loosest dirt, you won't get those back tires to spin on a bicycle if you got low power pressure. Put it up high pressure, put a few extra pounds in it, and you step on that bike, you'll feel the back tire slip out a lot, right? Same thing on a car. So there's your kind of advantage.
We used to do this a lot in motorcycle tires too. Not going to admit to too much here, but in closed track environments, if you ever wanted to say wheelie on purpose or things like that, and it was wetter outside, drop a couple pounds out of there, expands the surface area, you can get the bike up a little easier and quicker. Wouldn't recommend driving it at speeds because you lose a lot of your steerability and things like that, or on the flip side of that, if you're trying to, maybe do a burnout for a smoke show, because, they have those at events, if you increase the PSI by a few, it makes that tire a little fuller and gives you a smaller contact patch that's easier to slide under power. I think I
100
said that safely.
Yeah, no, 100%. You're 100% right. So, there's some examples, different types of vehicles, but that's the reason you might try changing your tire pressure. Another advantage I've heard is, and this is one that's kind of hard to picture, but a guy on YouTube explained it very well. I can't remember exactly who it was. It may have been Soft Roading the West that did it, but he drops his tire pressure not only because it gives him a little bit of better shock or the traction off road, but he also thinks it protects your tire. So, and his example is you take a balloon and blow it up to close to as much pressure as it can take, and just roll it over, say, some thumbtacks. And with very little pressure, very little trying, it's going to pop. Drop that balloon down to about half pressure, and when you roll it over those thumbtacks, the balloon will actually kind of like absorb it and just keep going on. It'll absorb. Same thing with rocks. Slightly lower pressure. If you do go over a sharp rock, it's not going to push through, but sort of just get absorbed and go on. So it allows your tire to kind of absorb that instead of push hard against it.
And that makes perfect sense. My only warning to that would be realize you can go too far the other way as well. And if you're under pressure, your tire will slowly tear itself apart. Because now a bunch of parts are rubbing and chafing that aren't supposed to build friction and all that good stuff. So anybody out there listening, realize it is a balancing act. Don't just go pull the valve stems out of your truck and be like, I'm the best off-road vehicle ever, because that won't work.
No. And in fact, I brought a truck in to get tires changed one time, and the mechanic sort of grabbed me and said, like, you have to see this. So I went in and looked at my tire, and I hadn't had the vehicle that long. Somebody did this before me. But they must have been running that tire very, very flat for a very long time. And the inside of the tire was nothing but rubber shavings. Because when you drive a tire very flat, that tire's flexing a ton. And when it flexes, it heats up. When it heats up, it starts to break down. And what had happened is the inside of the tire, basically one ply or maybe two, was lost inside. Like it actually wore it out because that folding, constant folding of the tire over and over again. And just picture any piece of rubber, just keep wiggling a piece of rubber, it wears out quicker. That softer tire, going down to 15 psi is one thing. Going down to 4 psi on a truck tire, you're almost riding on your rims at that point. The tire is really, really working hard. So, yeah.
Even going down to 15 psi, you got to check, make sure your tire's capable of it. You try that in a passenger tire, you might be down low enough that you could start causing damage once again. So, something worth checking if you're thinking this stuff over in your head, because I like the ability to drop about 10 psi, so I might go from 30 to 20. But then I started looking at some of these other tires, and they're saying, you can go down to 15 with some reliability. I'm like, why would you ever go down to 15? And that's where our conversation with Ben started up, saying, well, it's a little easier around rocks and stuff like that. It made total sense. Things I hadn't thought about before. Christian Lopez joins us live, I believe, for potentially the first time, so welcome. Same thing we told Fish85 there. If you got anything you want to say into this episode, just throw it in the comments. We do read them live, so by all means.
Yeah. So I'm a bit new to the whole downing the pressure of your tires, but I've been doing a lot of research on it, and I'm kind of excited to try it. And a few things though is when you finished, make sure you got a pump good enough to put your tires back up to the pressure, because you don't necessarily want to be driving on the highway at 120 kilometers an hour or more, depending on what your driving style is like. I drive like an old lady. Just ask anyone who's ever been with me. But barely doing 80 on the highway, really, honestly. But if you're driving at high speeds at a low pressure tire, you're probably not going to get the performance you expect or want or need. So get yourself a good air pump and make sure you can get that tire pressure back up. That's a really good thing to have in mind. And that's something I'm looking into too, looking for a better pump. I have a couple of pumps, don't think I don't. And there are valves you can buy, you can just screw in, that'll help you control your pressure and make sure you don't drop too much too quick. But there's also good tire pressure gauges that I have. Some of them you can just push a button and watch it go down and choose your point. So look at that stuff. If you're going to get into upping and downing your pressure, do invest on a good gauge, a good pump, and know how to properly adjust your tires and get them all down.
And when we say good pump, the $20 or $19 specials from Crappy Tire,
Not it.
Not it. They'll work. They'll work. Don't get me wrong. It's great to throw behind the seat. It's better than nothing. However, those are the first pumps that'll probably let you down somewhere in the backwoods. Generally, the wiring gets hot on them, or the pump will give out. Like they're almost a disposable pump. Now that being said, I have one in my truck. Don't misunderstand. I keep it for emergencies, and it has served me for emergencies a couple times now. But I never rely. Like I wouldn't bet my life on it. If I was going like the backwoods and that was the only pump I had, I would probably rethink it and pick something up a little better. And Christian, yeah, I thought you were on here before, so I know it's not your first time. It's been about 7 episodes. I was going to say, I'm pretty sure I've seen you, but I just wasn't 100% sure. We get a few people coming in and out, and I'm like, well, maybe I was thinking a different Christian, but I thought I seen you on here before. A plug kit, yeah, that's an extra good thing to bring too. So plugs, for what it's worth, I'm not sure about down there in Michigan, but up here they say you shouldn't really go drive more than 80 kilometers an hour if you plug a tire. Now that being said, if you do plug a tire, you can take it in and they'll do kind of an inside-out plug. It's called a blowout patch, where the plug kind of comes from the inside of the tire out and snip that off, and that's supposed to be better for higher speeds, though they still don't recommend that you do craziness on it, and they'll of course try and get you to purchase a new tire. But that's a whole other thing, and people have different opinions on that as well. But yeah, definitely bring a plug kit, because that can sometimes get you out of a hole.
Yeah, I have ran plugs in tires for a long time with no issues. So
I've run a plug in a motorcycle tire, which I would not recommend to anybody, but I've done it and not had problems.
The things you have to keep in mind is there is basically wire or bands, belts in your tire, and when it gets punctured, there's a chance that some of those belts are broken, and if those belts are broken, your tire can actually get very misshapen and cause all kinds of problems. So you do want to be awful careful with that. I just sent you like an example of probably a higher quality pump. This brand has a few. I mean, they start around $100, honestly, a lot of these better pumps that I've been looking at. And what you're looking at here is a few things, but you're looking at liters per, or a volume. How much volume can it put out? What pressure can it put out? And what your duty cycle is. These are some things you really want to be aware of. So if you're looking for one, like this one here mentions like RVs, bigger size tires. If you get one that says it's really good for a 16-inch tire, like a car tire, it may never be able to run. Like this one says 70 liters per minute. And I think it's easily capable of like 150 PSI. I've seen them can do 200 and 300 PSI, but honestly, some of those that say they can do that, I've watched them consistently struggle to do 35 PSI in a tear tire. Mm-hmm. So, in fact, to the point where I put one on to fill up my car tire one time, and it was taking so long, I went in to get a snack, and then someone called me, and I answered the phone, and then my wife had something on TV, and I sat down, and I'm like, oh shit. At the end of the show, I'm like, I probably blew the tire clean off the car, and I go, no, the pump still was done, but it had shut down.
And that's the thing. Those little pumps, they're an emergency pump. Once they've hit a high PSI, being high like 35, 40 once, it's iffy if they're going to fire again for you. They might. They may work perfectly for a while, but I would, once again, never really trust myself to one. You know what I mean?
And you have to take what they say here with a bit of grain of salt here, but they say like a 200 by 70 R16 tire, so a somewhat common car tire. They say you can go from 0 to 35 PSI in 1.5 minutes. So if you think about it, if you got 4 larger tires, like picture someone with a Jeep running 30, 35s, 37s, 34s, whatever, like big tires. Those guys are filling 4 of these tires 15 PSI each, and those last 15 PSI take a lot more air than the first 15 PSI. You're probably out there 10, 15 minutes topping those tires off.
Oh, for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
That's with a good pump, like a decent pump.
I was just going to say, what I have seen neat for those extreme off-roading guys, they get a compressor built into their truck. Like it hooks onto the drive motor, and it's the motor that drives the pump.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat setup. Just gets tacked on like it's a bolt-on. You buy one specific. They make them for like off-roading vehicles, so Jeep being kind of the standard on that one. So you find them more common for Jeep, but I have seen them for other vehicles. But yeah, it like bolts onto a bracket inside under your hood. You change a pulley out on something, and then you just flip another belt up onto it, and literally it drives off the motor. That way you're not relying on electric motors and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
specifically so they can they go for those like low or all tire air up systems where you connect all four and then you just jam it in the front and pumps everything up in a couple minutes and off you go.
I'm planning on making one of those for mine.
I think they're pretty neat. If you're planning to make one, I think I will back burner and wait to see how yours turns out.
Princess Auto had a couple of kits on, not designed for that, but it had all the fittings and wired or line that you would need to do that. And if I had that, I think I would buy a decent pump, mount it permanently, and run the dedicated wiring for it. And that's what I wanted to get on. The 4-in-1 is an awesome idea. You make sure all tires are equal pressure, hook them on. And you know what? Here's the thing: is if you had a tire that lost some pressure and you didn't have a working pump, when you hook it up to that system, the 3 other tires would sacrifice a bit of air, bring them up to a similar pressure, and get you out of a jam. So an awesome concept. Here's the thing: a lot of better pumps, and I say that like more powerful pumps, will actually pull as much or more power than your cigarette lighter can possibly put out.
Yep.
To the point where I've actually, even with a regular pump, my wife burned herself with the receptacle. When she pulled it out, it brushed her leg by accident, and it's hot enough to burn her. If you get the ones with the alligator clips and put it directly to your battery, you're not going to have that same kind of stress. You're not trying to put a lot of power through a very small wire. So look for ones with better connectors. Your cigarette lighter may not be able to handle it. Some cars are only in maybe 15
5 amps, 5 to 15 amps, depending, because a lot of cars now, it's not a cigarette lighter, it's just an accessory port. So they actually down the amperage in it. Because once upon a time with the cigarette lighter, you pushed in, it was actually, crossing out a coil, it had to hold a fair heavy amperage. But now it's like your phone charger. They're looking for 2 amps, 3 amps. So like some of those back like trunk accessory ports and stuff, you're looking at 5, 10 amps. On the whole heat up thing here, Christian was saying he had a $40 pump for his tires. It literally takes about 30 minutes between letting the wires cool down and not draining the battery because how much it's drawing. And I had mentioned the Canadian Tire specials. My oldest kid, technically Melissa's older sister. Anyway, whole other story. But anyway, she was using one and it melted the wires.
Yeah.
And it was only going from like 25 to 35 PSI.
Yeah. No. So a good pump makes all the difference. I mean, this is really a good entry-level pump. You start looking at some of the other ones, you're looking at a bit more money. I've been following a lot of these forums, these overlanding forums and stuff, and guys start talking about pumps. It's some serious conversations. This is a company that seems to have pretty good reviews, and it's a tire or pump that can put out a fair bit. It is not the king of all pumps by any means, but it's probably a good entry-level pump to consider. I have a couple of these $40, $50 pumps from Canadian Tire, Walmart, whatever. I'm not saying they're useless. I wouldn't. If that's what you can get and that's all you have, just be aware of its limitations. You may have to do duty cycle. Maybe run it for 5-10 minutes, stop. Run it for 5-10 minutes, stop. Let it cool down, because the last thing you want to do is have the pump burn out, the wires burn out, blow a fuse, and next thing you know, you can't pump your tire at all. So take some time. Fix a flat. There's another thing, like the compressed air in a can.
With the slime is the other one. Actually, can I have one of those?
Yeah. These things work great. I have used them. They can save you a lot. Only downside I've heard with them is your mechanic may hate you when you bring it in.
I was going to say, I've actually broken down a tire after using the green slime.
Yeah.
Oh, man, what a mess. I mean, it serves its purpose, but what a mess.
And I've seen, like, some new vehicles don't come with a spare tire anymore.
No, Mel's old Rio. It did not come with a spare tire. It had a jack and a fix-a-flat in the trunk.
Yeah.
Anyway, we kind of digressed there a little bit, though it's still important. Before we,
Tire-related?
still tire related, but before we run out, something I wanted to cover,
Hmm.
if I can remember what it was now.
Tire types?
Yeah, tire types. Like, besides passenger and light truck, you can also get like summer, all season, winter, mud and snow, all terrain,
Yeah. All-terrain winters.
all terrain winters, 4-season approved,
Yeah.
or anyway, let's just start going through them, and I'm sure the rest will come back to me.
So, all seasons, generally what they tell you here in Canada is all seasons are good for spring, summer, and fall. Basically, they say once the temperature starts to go below 7 degrees, which I've always said, what the hell do you mean? Half of winter in Nova Scotia, we're higher than 7 degrees. But at night, we're below. So where does that line draw? It's not as simple as even the commercials. It's funny, there was a commercial this year where they said, when the temperatures hit 7 degrees, you should change tires. I've seen 7 degrees in the summer.
It was
cold.
-1 this morning, and then 14 today.
Yeah. You know, we've seen a 30-degree temperature change in a 24-hour period here. So that's a hard one to go by. I don't think it's as easy as people want to say, right? Is it 7 degrees at noon?
I don't know, but I mean, you guys can make your own decisions about that. But that is the official wording, like Ben said. Once it dips below 7, technically your all seasons aren't supposed to run, even though they say all season, which is very deceiving to begin with, because you can get 3-season tires too. I forgot about that, which are literally for those 3 seasons.
So the big thing they say, though, is in those cold temperatures, like your summer tire, which is made of a harder material, won't wear down as quick and works very well at warm temperatures, won't stop as good. And I watched a good thing. Canadian Tire has some great videos on this, believe it or not, of like the big brands. I think they said like it was like 38 feet at one speed on ice. They managed to stop on a dedicated winter tire. On another tire, I think it was like a strong all terrain. It was like 40. I can't remember the numbers, but it was like say 30% longer. And then like just an all season tire, it barely stopped. Like I mean, it went 3 times as far as the winter tire. So think of it. Those feet mean the difference between running into a tree, another car, a human being,
going off a cliff,
or simply not making it up a hill. Like real world scenarios. First winter I spent here in Nova Scotia, I watched a big old 4-wheel drive truck not make it up a hill, and my little 2-wheel drive truck, I drove around them and went up, and I didn't have a hell of a lot better tires. Now, part of it is knowing how to drive, and part of it is how it's loaded and all that. But just be aware, tires make a huge difference. So you got your all seasons. The ones we want to talk about, I think mostly, I mean, we can talk about all of them, is all trains, winters, and all terrain winters, because these are the ones that are really going to sort of affect us here. And I think it's the ones we were kind of talking about. So all terrains are generally a more rugged tire, have bigger lugs, and are going to be really good probably in deep snow, mud, sand, slush, things like that.
Now, on the flip side of that, sometimes not always as good in ice and shallow snow.
Yeah. And maybe just like a little bit of slush. And it's because those big lugs will grab material and help pull you through. But if there's not a lot of material, they have big flat spots, and that's going to slide. And so you're basically going to be on ice skates. Where if you look at your winter tire, it's got a whole bunch of little cuts in it, and it's made of a softer material. And some of them, there's a few tires out there. I think Blizzak's had it. They had like walnut shells or fibrous material in it that actually acted like a sandpaper and grabbed into ice and stuff.
I think the set of winter tires that I got in the garage from Mel's old car has the walnut shells in them. Yeah.
And I have shoes that do the same thing. Like they have like little bits of glass in them. I mean, it's murder on floors if you haven't.
Don't wear them on the finest hardwood.
I don't mind. Work doesn't care. But no, I mean, like that little bit of grip makes a difference. Studs make a difference on ice. if you've never had the opportunity to have studded tires, and then get studded tires, night and day. I'm just going to tell you that, right?
Makes a huge difference on ice, deeper snow, little bit of difference. Pavement, it's almost like driving on ice with no stud or with summer tires.
Yeah.
You can slide around until the studs beat out, and I mean they will beat out fast because, like Ben said, generally softer tire compound in winter tires. So I know Fish here said that mostly down there they run all terrains and winters all year. Up here, on a passenger tire anyway, and I've done it on truck tires. I've run winters all year round, but low kilometers and stuff like that. But I have seen car tires, people run winters, brand new winter tires, put them on just at the start of the winter, run for half the summer, they're shot. The hot black asphalt we get just literally rips them apart.
Well, a lot of people, and I find this interesting with Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia does get some pretty warm summers. We get some hot days. You can almost fry eggs on the pavement some days. And yeah, it will do murder on a good winter tire. And I've seen people like low on money or whatever, just can't be bothered. They were trying to get around to it, and they drove their winters all summer, and then they wondered why. Like, I only bought them a year ago, or I only got a year and a half out of these tires. Well, you drove a winter tire all summer. Of course, it didn't last, right? But if you have the two sets, ideally, in Canada, in more northern climates, if you have two sets, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
Some people can't afford it.
That's understandable. I can't afford two sets for my truck. So, yeah. But I do have two sets for Mel's car. Difference being also, if we do any long distance driving, we take the car. The truck, I'm generally driving all short distances. I put less than 10,000 kilometers a year on.
Yeah. I understand. Yeah, I have two sets for both my vehicles, and it's just happened to be I got the second set for my vehicle for under $100. Like, I got 4 tires for $100 total, and that was on rims. So, and I ran those tires, and I still could. One of them was losing air a bit, but I still could. The tires were so old they're starting to crack. But yeah, so here's the question I have for you, and I have an answer myself, but I want to hear yours. And we haven't really talked this. How do you pick a tire? Do you pick a tire for your absolute worst case scenario? Do you pick the tire for your average scenario? Do you pick your tire for what you hope to be driving through? Because those are the three types of things, right? Me and you hope to be doing all off-roading. We hope that we never have to see pavement again. We know we're driving mostly pavement. We want to have something that's capable of doing it, but we also know we are going to get some days that are minus 30 and ice-covered roads. But we know that that's probably, 1-2 days a year?
Mm-hmm.
The rest of it in Nova Scotia, in my opinion, I have 80% of the day clean, dry pavement.
Yep. Now, see, I'm a little less off here. I have more winter conditions because just where we're at, they don't plow as often, and also the hill up into my work is basically always solid ice. There's some other things there, but I think to start to answer that question we set up last night when you and I were chatting, you got to be honest with yourself. Don't try and think about the glamorous of what could be. Really sit down, figure out what you're going to run. Ben and I came up with, we're running about 80-20%. 80% is going to be paved roads. 20% is going to be otherwise. I might get a little better on that. I might be 70-30, only because I have dirt roads around here that I travel on a regular basis. Not so much for touring or adventuring, but just because the roads I got to pass through, and that's the only way I'm gaining a little bit on this. Yeah. But, I mean, realistically, 2080 is probably pretty sound for the average, aside from going down Margamish and things like that, where I'm farting around the dirt roads. So realistically, when I was looking at a tire, I wanted all-terrain because I do want the ability to go through, those off-roads when I want. But the all-terrain that I'm looking at, I would like to have a good winter rating. So, yeah. and that's kind of where our conversation started. We started talking about, the Tri-Peak Mountain symbol and stuff like that. What does that actually mean? Well, that just means that the company has tested it, and it performs a certain way at -5 or something like that. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a great winter tire. It just means they tested it in colder weathers, and it made the pass. That doesn't mean it passed well.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to do your research there and find out what actually is a good winter tire when it comes to all terrains, because the all terrain is a great idea for me. That way, when I am farting around the dirt roads and stuff, I have that extra tread and things like that. The ones we were looking at, it had decent road ratings, so I could drive the little bit I do on the pavement. Like, even though it's 80% of my driving, I'm still under 10,000 kilometers a year. Decent road noise. It looks like a nice tire, and I mean, I hate to say vanity doesn't come into it, but at a certain point, you want these things to look okay on your vehicle. You don't want to look like a clown driving around, you know what I mean? You want some sort of aesthetic to them.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's my answer to that question. I think it's just to be honest and try and find something that fits best for everything. Maybe don't go to either extreme. Like, I'm not going to buy a complete mud tire just under the dream that I'm going to do nothing but go banging around in the backwoods. And I'm not going to buy a straight up pavement tire either, simply because I still tow a trailer. I still get into muddy spots just in my day-to-day work too, not just when I'm off trailing. Like, my dad owns a bunch of equipment and stuff like that, and I'm constantly floating around and looking at sites with him and going to homesteads and things like that where there's swampier areas and I need a little extra traction and blah, 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 but I don't need extreme in either way.
Yeah. I think both of us are looking for an all-terrain tire. Maybe, like you said, with a winter rating. We actually, I think, are both looking at some of the same tires. I don't think we should necessarily promote that too much. We have winter 6 months of the year, and they love salt here. Yeah, here too. They love salt for some reason, way more than I think they need to.
I also have a leg up on you there, because around here we use sand. Too many drilled wells.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think my road is supposed to be sanded, but my highway isn't. So it's hit or miss here. But yeah, no. Decent tires is, it's paramount to getting your vehicle in and out safely. So, like I said, I think we've both kind of narrowed it down to the same 2 or 3 tires. And we're not here to promote any particular tire company or brand by any means. But just, we've talked about a lot of things here, and we could continue talking. Trust me, we could talk for hours on this.
But now it's starting to nitpick and split hairs into things. We were trying to keep it broad, and I think we've accomplished that.
Do your research. Find out what tire is going to work for you. Like I said, make sure it's going to fit your vehicle and not rub, chafe, cause issues there. Make sure that it's not going to adversely affect your performance of your vehicle. Make sure that it's a tire that's going to handle the conditions you expect to see, and you actually expect to see, not the ones you dream.
Mm-hmm. Because if I met what I dream, man, I'd have some beefy tires on that truck.
We both would, though. Like, we would, we would both love, I'm sure, to have a vehicle that's like a rock crawler that can crawl up ridiculous terrain in it. But the reality is there's not that much rock crawling terrain available in Nova Scotia. You really have to look for it. There are plenty of dirt roads and plenty of areas to explore. Atlantic Canada in general has a ton. North America overall has even more. By far, there's other spots that are better. But if you want to get out back fishing, you want to hit that, that special fishing hole, or if you want to go to that special camping site, having a tire that can get you a little bit further with a little bit more security. I mean, some of these roads are kind of rough, loose rocks, sharp rocks, things like that. Having something a bit more durable is really going to help you out and give you that sense of security that know that once you get out there, you're probably going to make it back. You know what I mean? So, yeah. That being said, take care of all your vehicle. Make sure your shocks are good. Make sure your fluids are fine. Make sure your engine's actually running good. Make sure your bearings, drive chains, and everything are good. So, yeah, we'll leave it at that. Do you have anything you want to add?
Nope. I think you summed her up good. And like I said, anything I add on would just be a tangent or a tale. And we'll save that for this weekend.
Yeah. So, you said it, but I'll throw that in there. This weekend, if anyone's in the local area and would like to meet up, please reach out to us. We will be in just a couple of days. I am packing presently. Heading into the woods. We are going to share the location we're going to. It is relatively easy. It is car camping. And we've done this for your guys' benefit as well as ours, because if it was just the two of us, we might go a little bit deeper, but we want to make sure that everyone who wants to come can. And so it's not going to be busable if you're just from HRM, but other than that, it is relatively accessible. If you have any type of vehicle, you can drive to this place and meet up with us, hang out, share some food, some laughs.
Hopefully a few demos. We'll look at some equipment. I know the weather's not going to be great for Saturday, but you know what? It's just rain. We've all been out in the rain, and we're going to make this still just great.
It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome weather. I know it is.
Even if it's rain, all we have to do is set up a bunch of tarps and or porch mode, and trust me, the tails will flow.
All right. Yeah. I was just going to double check the weather, but last I checked, it's starting to look a little bit better.
Okay. And you know what it is, Nova Scotia, it's Atlantic Canada, whatever you want to look at it. Come Friday, the weather's probably going to change again. So I'm not stressing about it yet, and I'm not stressing about it then. But, like Ben said, if you want to get in touch with us, you can go to the AtlanticBushcraft.ca website there. There is a contact us method on that. You can go to any of our social media on either side that you see here. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, any of that. Throw in Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures, you'll find us. Hit the contact us. We do check that stuff. So yeah. Let us know. We'll give you the location, and hopefully we'll see us out there on... The majority of people are going to be showing up Saturday. Ben and I are trying to get out there Friday night.
Yeah, looks like Sunday's actually going to be kind of nice. They're still calling for a potential of 20 millimeters total over Saturday.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's rain. It's water. It's supposed to be warm.
That's why we have tarps.
Exactly. And raincoats.
Anyways, hopefully we see a few people out there. We'll see what we find.
Night all.
Night all.